So next we'll have Danielle Bassett. Danielle is the J. Peter Skierkanich Professor at the University of Pennsylvania. She has appointments in the departments of bioengineering, electrical and systems engineering, physics and astronomy, neurology, and psychiatry. Um, she's received a BS in physics from Penn State University and a PhD in physics from University of Cambridge in UK as a Churchill Scholar. She was also an NIH Health Sciences Scholar, and following her postdoc at UC Santa Barbara, she became a research fellow at the Sage Center for the Study of the Mind. Uh, Danielle has a number of areas of expertise and has won numerous awards, which you can find by going to her full bio on the platform. So with that, I'll turn things over to Danielle, who's going to tell us about some of her exciting work thinking from a new type of data set, Wikipedia, among other things. So just adding to the mix of the ways that we can capture people's natural behavior as they go about their lives. So Danielle, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. So today what I wanted to do was to think about the curious human from perhaps a different perspective than we would normally. So the human mind, as we know, is curious. It's strange and remarkable and mystifying. It's eager, probing, and questioning. Despite the pervasiveness, though, of curiosity and its relevance for our well-being, scientific studies of human curiosity that bridge both the organ of curiosity and the object of curiosity remain in their infancy. So in this talk, what I want to do is to integrate historical, philosophical, and psychological perspectives with techniques from applied mathematics and statistical physics to capture idiosyncratic forms of curiosity that span multiple millennia, cultures, languages, and timescales. In doing so, I'll make a case for the position that a science of the mind must account for minds of today and those of yesteryear. So, what is curiosity, and what makes a human curious? The quandary of how to define curiosity and its places and uses, its actions, is not a challenge that we newly face. Instead, it has been faced by many before us. So Augustine in 397 said that curiosity is a lust to experience or find out. Aquinas in 1270 said curiosity is the desire to know. Descartes in 1649 wrote, curiosity is a desire to understand. And Locke in 1693 said curiosity is an appetite after knowledge. William James, 1899, curiosity is the impulse toward better cognition. And Dewey in 1993 states curiosity is an interest in problems provoked by the observation of things and the accumulation of material. Voss in 1983, curiosity is a motivational prerequisite of exploratory behavior. And Lowenstein in 1994, curiosity is a feeling of deprivation produced by information gaps. Even most recently, Kidd in 2015 said curiosity is a drive state for information. Now, these definitions are all well and good, but they're also rather abstract, and scientists today typically instead use contemporary actions to measure curiosity. So maybe curiosity is the asking of questions or the raising of hands in a classroom. Maybe curiosity is the liking of trivia or the clicking on advertisements or the scanning of Twitter feeds. From these measurements, scientists can separate the more curious from the less curious. But these contemporary measurements and techniques suffer from two problems. First, they succumb to the bias of temporal primacy. So by solely studying the brains, societies, and cultures of today, we neglect the richness of human culture over millennia. But second, they offer an impoverished low-dimensional summary of curiosity that privileges amounts of curiosity over kinds of curiosity. So to address these problems, we've worked with Professor Perry Zurn, a philosopher at American University, who performed a historico-philosophical examination of the use of terms for curiosity in English, French, German, and Latin over the last 2 millennia. The method takes a common contemporary concept, like curiosity or practice, and traces its use and meaning over one or several historical periods. From these data, he built a taxonomy of curiosity based on kinesthetic signatures, so actions or movements. He refers to them as the busybody, the hunter, and the dancer. The first kinesthetic signature of curiosity is the busybody. So a good description comes from Plutarch in his On Curiosity, where he says, and the busybody, shunning the country as something stale and uninteresting and undramatic, pushes into the bazaar and the marketplace and the harbors asking, is there any news? A second example comes from Martin Heidegger's In His Being and Time, where he refers to curiosity as the not staying with what is nearest, or the distraction by new possibilities, and the never dwelling anywhere. Interestingly, this kinesthetic signature suggests that the busybody enjoys building a knowledge of disconnected units of information, going to the bazaar and just picking out little bits of news. Let's turn now to the second kinesthetic signature. This is the hunter. Again, from Plutarch's On Curiosity, he says, if you have to be curious, although he doesn't really prefer you to be, don't turn aside and follow every scent, but keep your sense of smell pure and untainted for its proper task. And you can also take from Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, the man of curiosity is described as wishing he had a few hundred helpers and good, well-trained hounds that he could drive into the history of the human soul to round up his game. And finally, from Jacques Derrida, in The Animal That Therefore I Am, to be curious is to track, to sniff, to trail, and to follow some of the reasons for the so confident usage of words. So the hunter is clearly curious, but in a strikingly different way than the busybody is. Interestingly, this kinesthetic signature suggests that the hunter enjoys a building of knowledge of connected information units, tracking one piece after another in a pursuit, a straight pursuit towards a particular missing piece. Now we can contrast both the busybody and the hunter with the third kinesthetic signature, and that's the dancer. Again from Nietzsche, but now in his Gay Science, thinkers of the future are envisioned thus. We do not belong to those who have ideas only among books, and when stimulated by books, it's our habit to think outdoors, walking, leaping, climbing, dancing, preferably on lonely mountains or near the sea, where even the trails become thoughtful. Our first questions about the value of a book or of a human being or of a musical composition are, can they walk? Even more, can they dance? And from Michel Foucault in his The Masked Philosopher, we have, I can't help but dream about a kind of criticism that would try not to judge, but to bring an avoir, a book, a sentence, an idea to life that would light fires, watch the grass grow, listen to the wind, and catch the sea foam in the breeze and scatter it. It would multiply not judgments, but signs of existence. It would summon them, drag them from their sleep. Perhaps it would invent them sometimes, all the better. I'd like a criticism of scintillating leaps of imagination. I dream of a new age of curiosity. Interestingly, this kinesthetic signature suggests that the dancer enjoys building a knowledge of connected clusters, connected then by leaps of imagination from one bit to another. Now, this is all wonderful, and we could continue on the philosophical bent for the whole time, but what I'd like to do is to actually turn to the science. From each of these kinesthetic signatures, we can note that perhaps curiosity is not what we are curious about, so trivia or otherwise, and curiosity perhaps is not what physical actions we take, but instead curiosity is how we build knowledge from concepts and their relations. So the busybody builds disconnected knowledge, the hunter builds orderly targeted knowledge, and the dancer complements local order with long leaps into new conceptual spaces. So let us posit that as humans, as we move from book to book, or as scientists, as we move from paper to paper, or as citizens, as we move from web page to web page, we are building our knowledge networks. What sorts of networks do we build? And do our preferences differ? These questions amount to asking how we are curious and whether we are curious differently from one another. So the work I'll describe in the next few minutes was led by psychologist Dr. David Leiden-Staley, who's now a professor in the Annenberg School of Communication at Penn. And David began this study by inviting 149 human participants to browse Wikipedia for 20 minutes a day for 21 days. The participants signed a consent form allowing us to install software on their laptop to track which Wikipedia pages they viewed and when. Across the entire study, 18,654 pages were visited by each participant over 5 hours spanning 21 days. To build networks from their Wikipedia browsing, we represented each Wikipedia page as a node in the network, and we represented each edge between Wikipedia pages as the cosine similarity, so bounded between 0 and 1, between all possible pairs of vectors of term frequency, inverse document frequency associated with the text of each page. So intuitively, that's just telling you how similar is the content of each page. On the right, what you see is an individual who browsed quite distinctly, and so that's the darker colors, low similarity values, and an individual who browsed quite related pages, so that's the lighter colored bars on the right-hand side, higher similarity values on average. So now that we've built the networks, we're ready to assess their network structure and the pattern of connections between concepts that people walk among. We use tools from network science, which is an emerging scientific discipline that studies the architecture, dynamics, design, and control of complex interconnected systems. It provides a toolbox including analysis methods and statistical metrics that can be calculated and then compared. So translating the historical philosophical taxonomy into network phenotypes, we hypothesize that a hunter will build networks with high clustering and low path length. And conversely, we hypothesize that busybodies will build networks with high path length and low clustering. The clustering coefficient measures the probability that a node's neighbors are also connected to each other, and it can be thought of as the proportion of connected triangles in the network. Someone whose network has high clustering would visit related Wikipedia pages. The path length, in contrast, measures how many links need to be traversed to get from one node to another. And someone whose network has high path length would visit fairly unrelated Wikipedia pages. Now, this translation of the historical philosophical taxonomy into network phenotypes allows us to operationalize the kinesthetic signatures of curiosity in the parlance of the emerging discipline of network science. But to formalize the link to curiosity even further, we make a prediction about what features a participant personality might track with these network phenotypes. We hypothesize that individuals high in deprivation sensitivity have a drive to eliminate the unknown as they encounter new information and recognize gaps in their knowledge. Therefore, individuals high in deprivation sensitivity will be the hunters with high clustering, while individuals low in deprivation sensitivity will be the busybodies with low clustering. So we tested these hypotheses in the Wikipedia browsing data, and the results confirmed our hypotheses. So we indeed found that deprivation sensitivity, the tendency to seek information that eliminates knowledge gaps, is associated with the creation of relatively tight networks and a relatively greater tendency to return to previously visited concepts. More simply, individual differences in deprivation sensitivity lead to the creation of knowledge networks with distinct architectures. So when we seek information, we seek it differently, constructing different knowledge networks. But not only do we seek information differently from each other, but also from day to day, we seek information differently. Me today seeks information differently than me yesterday. So to understand this, we separated the data into early, middle, and late browsing, and also measure sensation seeking as it varies day to day, and depression as it varies day to day as well. We found that days of greater sensation seeking than normal are days in which participants tend to build more as busybodies than as hunters. From these data, we can conclude that each day we are differently curious than any other day. We also finally built a computational model of this kinesthetic curiosity that generates walks on existing knowledge network architectures. And in that model, we balance preferences to retrace familiar versus explore unfamiliar sections of Wikipedia, and preferences to take short steps versus long steps. With these two parameters, the model can predict the architectures of the networks that people build with different kinesthetic preferences. We find that deprivation sensitivity is associated with retracing the familiar, whereas depression is associated with taking shorter steps, conceptually shorter steps. So steps between Wikipedia pages that are nearby to one another conceptually. The links between sensation seeking, depression, and kinesthetic actions in knowledge space underscore the potential reflections of clinical factors in the way we walk on networks. And collectively, both the data and the computational model serve to reconceptualize curiosity as an act of connecting rather than a method of acquiring information. So to briefly summarize, here we began by asking the hard questions: what is curiosity and what makes a human curious? We were dissatisfied with existing definitions that were not embodied in the human form. So we therefore turned to history and philosophy, to ancient and modern texts, to develop a more holistic approach to the study of curiosity. We discussed the work of philosopher Perry Zurn, uncovering three main styles of curiosity and noted their differences in connectivity, which led us to postulate that curiosity can be fruitfully defined as knowledge network building. And then we developed a scientific experiment using Wikipedia browsing and capitalizing on recent advances in applied mathematics to validate that postulate. The work is a living reflection of my earlier claim that a science of the mind does well to account for the minds of today and those of yesteryear. So thank you very much for listening. Excited to have the questions later.